Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Tech Tips Live today. I'm Adrienne Depew. I'll be your host. We will be presenting on the topic of approval process and PDF generation. Today I'm with Byron Shetler and Jackson Bush. Byron is our CTO and Alpha Geek, and Jackson is a member of our development staff. So I just want to remind you that as we're going throughout the presentation here, please go ahead and submit your questions, and as we have time, we will make sure to address them. If the questions don't get answered during the webinar, we'll be sure to answer those afterwards via email. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Byron to go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Adrienne. I'm pretty excited about Jackson's presentation today. I think you're going to see some cool Python, some good structure, do some cool things with getting some digital signatures, generating PDFs, and maybe, to me, one of the more important things that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, but you have complete control over your user interface using the .NET Forms interface built into the GainSeeker Python implementation. So you can basically create your own screens and make them do whatever you want. Got all the power of .NET available to you through that. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Jackson and let him get going.
All right. Hi, I'm Jackson. Like Adrienne said, I'm Jackson Bush. I'm one of the developers here at Hertzler. So I'm one of the people responsible for the bugs that you run into and calling to our awesome support staff about. I'm here today to talk about a cool way to do your approval process using dashboards and Python code. And let me just share my screen real quick here. Okay. I'm going to start off by showing you the finished product, and then we can dive into the weeds a little bit and see what's going on. So along the way, we're going to cover getting user input, getting records from the database, generating a report in HTML, using WinForms to create and display a custom form, and PDF generation. If you don't speak Python or programming in general, don't run away. You just might have something. You just might see something that you like, or something that you might want to implement or have implemented. However, I can't promise that we won't get too far down into the weeds, because what's the fun in that? Okay, so what's a cold storage report? We created this cold storage report. It's basically checking our freezers periodically to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to. The data for each batch number needs to be reviewed and approved by a supervisor. So we created a dashboard that would allow supervisors to pick a batch number, view the report for that batch number, and then give approval for it. So let's say I need to review the data for 09A13, that batch number. I would select it from the list and hit OK. And then the report's generated, and right away we can see, okay, we have a couple failures here. There's some ice buildup. And maybe there looks like there's at least one returned product that wasn't properly identified or wasn't in the right spot. And since I'm a supervisor, I know, hey, like we had a new recruit start this week, so they're still learning the ropes. And so I'm going to add a comment down here saying, new recruit this week, they're still learning. Okay, and so I reviewed the data. I've added my comment, so I'm going to go ahead and approve this report. So I'll click approve, and this dialog pops up, allowing me to enter my name and my password to sign off on the report. And I'll type in my super secure password here, 1234. Click OK, and then we are generating this PDF. So you can see that my name is on here, so it's saying that I approved it and the date time that I approved it at. And then the comment that I added is in the little table at the bottom. So I'll close out of this, and a message pops up telling me that the PDF was successfully saved and where it was successfully saved to. And I'll click to continue, and we're back to the list of batch numbers. You can see that the batch number that I just approved, 09A13, is no longer in the list because it's been signed off on. Okay, so now that you've all seen the finished product, let's dive into how all of it's working. So the first thing that we're doing is having the user pick the batch number. So here's the code. inner main is where all the magic is happening. Hopefully it's big enough for you to see on your screens. If it's not, you can let Adrian know and I'll make it bigger. So getting the list. So the first thing we're doing is getting the list of batch numbers for the user to pick which one to approve. And so essentially all we're doing there is in this function running a SQL query to get that list of batch numbers. And then we are displaying that in a list select. So we're creating a new list select and passing in those batches that we got from the SQL query, adding a couple buttons, and then using dis.show to show that on the dashboard. And so if you saw my dashboard really quick, I kind of went through that quickly. All I have is one big Python script designer control on it, and so when you call dis.show, it paints the entire screen with that with the disk window, and so that's where the user chooses their batch number, and right here, sorry. And dis.show will wait until they click one of the buttons that was added, and then once they've done that, dis.getResult tells us which button was clicked, and the value property of the list select object is what they chose. So once they've picked the batch number, we're doing another SQL query in order to get the records for that batch number. So we're passing the batch number in and then using it in this big long SQL query and getting the records for that batch number. Okay, so we're doing another query here to just, you saw there was a second table in the HTML, and that's what the second query is for. So now that we have our data, the task becomes to create the HTML. And so we're going to use that data we got back from our queries, and we're going to generate that report in HTML with a little bit of CSS and a little bit of JavaScript to display to the user. And at this point, you might be thinking, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? I thought this presentation was about Python. How can you create that with Python? And as far as Python is concerned, all we're really creating is a big long string that happens to be HTML code. And so I'm here in this build HTML function, and I'm getting ahead of myself. So at the end of the day, we're just creating a really long string where the CSS and JavaScript are embedded in style and script tags, and the finished product should look something like this. So we've got our HTML tag. In the head tag, we have style tag that's got the CSS, and then a script tag with the JavaScript, and then in the body we have the rest. We have the rest of the report. So we have that first table, and then the second table, and then lastly that little comment table at the bottom. And so the table's got rows, which are TR tags, and then either table data or table header tags for the individual pieces of data in the table. So that's what we're building in Python. And so at first glance, you might notice that for a function that builds itself as building HTML, there's not a ton of HTML code in it. And so one thing you should know about programmers, and I think Byron knows this well, is that we're inherently lazy people.
The best programmers are lazy programmers,
right? So
reuse code.
Yeah, I would consider writing HTML to be a little tedious, writing the opening tags and the closing tags, and so I'm using this. I just wrote a little helper function, which are really helpful sometimes, called wrap tag, and that's basically just takes contents, and then wraps it in a tag name. And so instead of seeing this kind of messy stuff everywhere, instead you're only seeing the information you really care about, which is the name of the tag. And there's some other optional parameters, which is like a class name, but so that it just makes the code a lot cleaner. And programmers love clean code. So in this method, we're first creating the contents of the header, and then we're creating the contents of the body, and then we're wrapping those. We're combining them and wrapping them in an HTML tag. So to start off, we are creating the header, and for that, we're getting the style and the script, those script contents, and those are separated out into separate methods, and they just return just really long strings. So if you know CSS, this should look familiar to you. If you don't know anything about CSS, it stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's essentially a way of to specify styling information for elements in a separate section from the HTML code. And typically it uses a separate file, but it can also be inline in the style tag in the head of the HTML. And so this first section here, for example, is just defining a couple styles for elements with the class of main. And then in the getScript function, we're just returning a long string as well, and this is some JavaScript. And if you don't know anything about JavaScript, it's the programming language of the web. So there are other languages that run in browsers, but JavaScript is by far the most popular. And all I'm doing right here is defining an event listener that will run when the page loads and give focus to the comment area text box at the bottom, so that the user doesn't have to click in it. They can just type in it right away. So that's what we're doing. That's how we're creating the header. We're getting that style contents, wrapping it in a style tag, reading the script contents, and wrapping it in a script tag. And then we're combining those and wrapping them in a head tag, and that's the header of the HTML. Next, we are using that data that we got back from our query, and we were creating HTML tables, using it to create HTML tables. And as a process, it's relatively straightforward. So the data comes back in a list of lists, where the inner list is a record. And so we are looping through those records and creating table rows for them. And so first we're building a header row, and that I've just defined the headers right here. And so we're looping through those and wrapping each of them in a th for table header tag, and then we're combining all of those and wrapping that in a tr for table row tag. And next we're looping through those inner lists in the data we got back, and we are creating a table row for each of those. And so for the main table, we have to massage data a little bit to get it into a more displayable form, but then we're just looping through each of those, wrapping them in a td for table data tag, and then we combine those and wrap them in a tr for table row tag, and we're combining all of those table rows, strings, and wrapping that in a table tag, and that's our HTML table. So we're doing the same thing with that quality checklist table, and once we finish the body string, then we just combine the head string and the body string and wrap those in an HTML tag, and that's our HTML. Okay, so now that we've generated the HTML, we display it. We display the report on the dashboard, and so all we're doing for that is we're resetting the disk window with disk.reset, and then creating a new browser display object, setting the HTML string that we just created as the HTML property of that object, adding another couple buttons, and using disk.show to paint the screen with it. Once the users clicked approve, assuming that they've clicked approve, what we're doing next is we are displaying that approval form for them to sign off on the report. We're doing a little bit of browser scraping in order to get the note that the user typed in. So we're using the disk.get browser result function, and that's a text area. We're using get text area, and that's getting us the contents of the note that the user typed in. So assuming the user clicked approve, we need to have them sign off on the report. So to do this, I used WinForms to create a custom form that takes the sign-off name and a password. And what WinForms does is it allows you to specify that a text box should use the password characters, so those little dots, instead of displaying the password as the user types it in. I should say that this also could have been done by showing an HTML form, but I chose WinForms because that's what GainSeeker is written on. GainSeeker uses WinForms, and so I wanted the sign-off form to look like a natural extension of GainSeeker. So how can we use WinForms through Python? Well, GainSeeker actually doesn't use the default implementation of Python, which is called CPython, and is written in C. It actually uses IronPython, which is an implementation of Python that's written in C#. And this means, which some of you, that might just be gobbledygook, but that means that it's fully integrated in the .NET framework. And so we can use .NET assemblies like WinForms, which GainSeeker is written on, and use them like Python modules. So loading .NET assemblies is done with the CLR module. And so you can see here we're adding references to the system.windows.forms and system.drawing assemblies. And then we're importing a bunch of classes from them. And then we're defining a custom class called password form that inherits from the form class that we imported from system.windows.forms. And so in the init method of this class, which is what gets run when the class is created, we have a ton of code, and this is what defines the form. So as you can see, it takes a significant amount of code, but it's not too complicated once you break it down. So initially, we are creating all of the controls that will go on the form. So that's the text boxes that you type in, and the labels. So the labels that say sign off, and a label that says password, and the buttons that are at the bottom. So we're creating those controls, and then we're just setting a bunch of properties on them. So we're setting the location where they are on the form. We're setting the size, how big they are, their text, the font, and so that's all this code. And then finally, we are adding them to the form and setting some properties on the form itself. And we basically created the form. One other thing that we've done is we defined some event listeners. So two event listeners, one on the click event of the OK button, and one on the click event of the cancel button. And those are just functions that are defined below. And so when the user clicks OK, we're checking to make sure that they've given a sign-off name, and that the password's correct. And if either of those is false, we make an error label visible so they know what's wrong and why it's not, why they're not able to close the form or hit OK. But if they're both true, then we're setting the dialog result property to OK, and we're setting a property called sign off by, just so that we know who signed off on the form, and then we're closing the form. And in the cancel click event handler, we're just closing the form. And so when we go back to inner main, we're creating the form, and then we're using application.run to open it up, and then the form takes care of closing itself when either the users click the X button on the top right, or they've clicked OK or hit cancel. So once they've approved on the form, we're updating those batch records. So we're just adding a little bit of traceability to those batch records, so that we know that they've been signed off on. So we're just adding signed off and then who has signed off on it. And then we are creating a record we're creating a note record for the comment if they added a comment in that text area. And then finally, we are updating the HTML and creating the PDF. And to do that, I'm just doing some replacing in the HTML string to add that string that's who approved the report and what the date time is. And then we are using file.html to PDF, which is a built-in Hertzler command to create the PDF. And so that takes HTML, which is that HTML string that we created, and then a file name. So what's the file that they need to create, and then some optional parameters. So I'm just specifying here that it should be landscape. And so that creates the PDF, and then we use misc.run to pop it open, and that just opens it in the user's default PDF viewer. And this parameter is just specifying that we're going to wait on them to finish interacting with that process that we created there. So once they close the PDF, then it'll continue. And finally, we're just popping up the message saying, hey, it's been successfully saved, and giving them the file name. All right, so now that I've run through it, now that I've shown you all the code, I'm just going to run through it one more time so you can, and just kind of talk about what's going on so you can see it again. So here, we're displaying a list of batch numbers, and again, we just did a SQL query to get the batch numbers that haven't been signed off on yet.
So if you wanted to show stuff that had been signed off, how would you do that?
So yeah, you could, if you wanted to show stuff that had already been signed off on, you could add like a checkbox or a radio button that would toggle between showing ones that have been signed off and showing ones that haven't been. But I'll leave that up as an exercise to the user.
All right.
So yeah. So once someone's once you pick the batch number, then we're going out doing another SQL query to get the records for that batch number, and then doing all that HTML generation code to generate this report. And you can see that the text area in the bottom has the focus, so I can just start typing right away. And so I'll just leave a note here. And then once they've clicked approve, we are creating that custom WinForms form and displaying it. And so I'll show you those error messages here real quick. So if I don't specify a signed off name, then it won't close, and it pops up a nice little error message saying, hey, this field is mandatory. And if the password's wrong, another error message that's saying it's an invalid password. We click OK, everything's good, so we close that little custom form, and then we create the PDF. And you can see the comment in here and who approved it, and then the little message saying, hey, it's been successfully saved. And that's all there is to it. So yeah, hopefully I didn't go too fast and you got something out of it. And if you want to know more about HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, I'd recommend W3 Schools as a great resource, and we can send those links out in the email after the Tech Tips Live. And then IronPython, if you want to know more about IronPython and .NET assemblies, IronPython's documentation is really handy, so and we'll send that link out as well. And as far as the Hertzler commands that were used, our help file is awesome. So if you want to know anything more about the Hertzler commands, use the help file. I use it all the time.
We actually have a question here, Jackson. One of them is, do you have Active Directory integration with password?
Oh, yeah. So actually, we could do Active Directory integration. That's another .NET assembly that you can use through IronPython, the system.directory services assembly. So we could have used that as well. I chose to go with just 1, 2, 3, 4 out of just to make it easier. But
Great.
yeah, that's totally possible.
All right, and it looks like we have another one here. I'll go ahead and urge anyone to chat or send me your questions if you have any, but I've got one more here. Will you be adding this to the script library?
Yes, yeah, we are planning on adding this to the script library sometime in the next day or so, just to, yeah, we're going to look over it, and then we'll add it to the script library. So yes, we are planning on doing that.
And we tried to keep this example somewhat simplistic. Obviously, your report's probably more complex than what we were showing here, but this would give you a good framework to start from if you want to do something similar to this with your own reports.
Right. Yeah. And this is written on the tour data set, tour foods configuration. So you can download it and use it. You'd be able to download it and it would run like it is right here.
Okay. So I could if they've got the tour data set loaded, they could plug it in and run it. And
Yeah, and it would work just like
Great.
it is right here.
Okay. So Jackson, you were in the Python editor quite a bit. Could you maybe show people some of your favorite hotkeys, some of the shortcuts in there that they may not be aware of, some of the little
Yeah, I'd be
little
happy
tricks.
to. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, the one I was using a lot, obviously, was Control F, and most people know that. But yeah, Control F to do find, and then F3 to toggle through everything that you found. And so I do that a lot to kind of navigate my way through the code. One that we added recently that most people might not know about is if you hold down Alt and use the up and down arrows, you can move lines up and down, which is really handy. I use that a lot. And if you highlight multiple lines, all the lines that have highlighting on them will move.
That is very cool.
And the really cool thing about it is if you do it a lot and then you hold down Control Z, it magically all goes back to where it came from, which is just kind of fun to watch.
It's a video game.
That is great.
Yeah. The final one that I use a lot is Control Shift and L, and that's just deleting a line. Or if you highlight multiple lines, deleting all the lines that have highlighting on them. And that's just something that I've used a lot in Visual Studio that we put in GainSeeker because it's just handy to have. And those are the ones. Oh, I guess there's also commenting lines. Control Shift 3, I think. Yeah, toggles comments on and off on a line, which is handy. So you don't have to keep typing pound signs or hashtag, depending on what generation you're from.
All right. So you showed some HTML to do screen updates. There's this disk or display object that we've got built into Hertzler's implementation of Python, and that allows you to do display HTML, checkboxes, buttons, all sorts of things. And then we also did a Windows form through the .NET library. So we really kind of showed three different ways to that people could paint the screen,
right?
Put information up on the screen.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, there's lots you can do.
Well, thank you for that, Jackson. Really very helpful information. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's been our pleasure, and let you know that the next Tech Tips Live is scheduled for March 21st, where Byron and Jacob Shetler will be speaking to the topic of artificial intelligence and GainSeeker. I hope you all can make it. Put that on your calendars. With that, we will bid you a good afternoon and hope to be talking to you in the future real soon. Thank you, everyone.